Brown versus Board of Education is a landmark Supreme Court decision that really benefited the black men, women, and children that lived in the South in the 50s, and it was the case that helped end all segregation in the South. Before the final decision of the court case, Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka, segregation was enforced in all public schools. What this means is that all public schools were divided by race, so there were schools for whites and schools for blacks. This was legal under the court case Plessy v. Ferguson. In that case, segregated accommodations were acceptable as long as facilities for blacks and whites were equal. In most cases, they weren't. And the court's decision upheld Jim Crow laws, which forbade African Americans from using the same buses, schools, and other public facilities as white people. And the separate but equal doctrine stood for almost 6 decades. In those decades, there was an important formation that was created in 1909. The NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, was created in response to segregation and violence of the South. The NAACP were the ones that supplied the legal team for Brown v. Board of Education, and the ones who argued that the ruling in Plessy v. Ferguson was unconstitutional, and that it was naturally violating the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment. Oliver Brown, the plaintiff, sued the Topeka, Kansas Board of Education in a class action lawsuit in 1951, after his daughter, Linda Brown, was turned away from the city's all-white elementary school. That would have been a direct violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. In the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, it states that no state shall make or enforce any law which shall deny any person within its jurisdiction that equal protection of the laws, nor shall any state abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law. Thus, discrimination is prohibited by the states, and everyone who has a life must be treated equally. The decision, written by Chief Justice Earl Warren, was delivered on May 17, 1954. It was in favor of the plaintiff. Some of the primary reasons made by the plaintiff, who claimed that segregation generates a feeling of inferiority as to the place in the community that may influence their hearts and minds in a way unlikely to be undone, were integrated into the court's phrasing. African Americans viewed the verdict as the start of a new age and advancement opportunity. Grassroots organizations grew in membership and momentum. More black people signed up to vote. The NAACP experienced a surge in membership, particularly in northern cities, and its foot soldiers developed the confidence and courage to open field offices in the South. Black World War II veterans hoped the Supreme Court ruling would usher in a wave of change, if not for them, but for their children, after being shocked to discover Jim Crow cruelty staring them right in the face. Most of the South continued to resist it violently. The reaction was fast and venomous in Mississippi, which was widely regarded as a southern state with the strongest pro-segregation policies. The Jackson Daily News joined all major elected officials in Mississippi in pledging to fight the decision, calling it the worst thing that has happened to the South since the carpetbaggers and the scallywags took charge of our civil government during the Reconstruction days, and it predicted it would cause racial strife of the bitterness of sort. Mississippi cannot and will try not to abide by such a ruling, the editorial stated, even though it was made by a unanimous vote of 9 members of the nation's highest tribunal. Many whites in the Deep South were made very opposed by the Brown decision a year after it was made. In 1955, politicians in Mississippi utilized their popularity to support segregationist candidates during the election year. African Americans encountered fierce and even fatal resistance when they tried to exercise their right to vote. Emmett Till was one of 3 African Americans who were murdered in cold blood that summer. Mississippi schools were still firmly segregated when classes began in the fall of 1955. Segregationist whites would decide to remove their children from public school systems rather than to send them to school with African American children. Years after, the state government eventually conceded that it could not maintain segregated schools in the light of the Supreme Court judgment. This case really made the states have less powers, and the black population of the southern states had more freedom and equality to the white population.